Hey, fellow G&Ters, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. So we are in the midst of one of our little series. We like to do sometimes a little mixology, G&T, and what we're mixing up this time is a conversation about this thing called the emotional plague. This is from the eccentric, quirky, but genius psychologist one Wilhelm Reich, and his ideas that societies and cultures can have these toxic ideas that can spread kind of like an infection through a culture. And he was talking about this before social media. And so we've been talking about his stuff there, but we've been doing a little mix up mashup thing to also talk about this like relative and in conjunction with our talking about some of the traditional Chinese medical ideas that kind of harmonize well with that. So that's been what we've been doing. And now we're really talking about, on the one hand, the lung and emotions of sadness and grief in TCM theory and how that fits into these discussions of like emotional plague stuff. Before we go into the heart of the matter, if you can do all those things that everybody asks you to do at the start of every podcast you ever listen to, which is to like and subscribe, write a review, share an episode with a friend, and everyone always says the same thing. So we just did it too, and it sort of helps people out. So thanks so much for doing that. Otherwise, we're into talking about this emotional plague thing. Anything more on the intro, Daniel, before we get into it?
Nope.
All righty. Well, on the one hand, I like to say it every time, the emotional plague is kind of a personal thing. If you want to like make yourself improve psychospiritually, you got to sort of escape this. This is a lot what they talk about in the tantras, that you transcend the mundane sort of ideas of the world that you live in so you can achieve greater things. So there's a personal level, and then there's sort of a more sweeping level, which Reich talks about in his Mass Psychology of Fascism, that this stuff can spread through a whole community of people, a whole society of people. And then the third thing that we haven't been mentioning all the time, but I think is really important, maybe for this episode especially, is that the emotional plague is not just like a psychological thing, it's a physical thing too, which is why we're kind of doing our mix up here of these two things, meshing them together, because there's a physicality in this, like, and that's very creative and Reich and very much fits into a lot of like Asian philosophy. The mind
Hmm.
and the body mirror one another, the mind and the spirit mirror one another. And so this emotional plague thing, you think, well, that's a psychological idea, but it also has these physical components to it too. All right. So with that as the context, we're talking about the lung. On the one hand, the emotions that are usually talked about this are sadness and grief, though we'll be able to kind of maybe stretch that out a little bit. And then usually there's this idea that there's some positive psychological states and emotions that are tied into each of these. And in my taste for the metal, I like to think of it as sort of like fairness and senses of equality and justice. And sometimes people will say righteousness. Righteousness is kind of a funny word because sometimes it has negative connotations, right? You can be like a self-righteous person, and that doesn't sound as positive. But on the positive hand, things like fairness and justice and desires for things to be equal and fair. Is that how you think about the virtues of the Long Tu in Taoism and Chinese medicine, Daniel? Is that
Yeah, so just so as a
vibe with you?
yeah, just like a brief thing for those people who are not familiar, the metal Eric mentioned metal, and in Chinese medicine, the we're referencing the metal element. So we've talked previously about the water element, which is like the kidneys, urinary bladder. We talked about the wood element, which is like the liver, gallbladder, kind of focusing more on one, like the liver, more on the other, on kidney. And in this one, the metal element is more a little bit more focused on the lung. So just to give a little bit of a context for those who are listening, you know.
Yeah, and okay, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, finish. Go ahead.
I was gonna say like big in the Chinese medical world, and then for our psychospiritual conversations, big in like the Taoist world, right?
Yeah,
Like real quintessential point. Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, in terms of the positive attributes, yeah, fairness, justice, righteousness. I also like to think of it like order, like in a
Yeah.
very right order. You know, everything in its place, a place for everything, which has positive attributes in keeping things. I can't think of a different word, but right or in order, if
Mhm.
you will. But then also can some other attributes very rigid.
Yeah, so it has its ups and downs, some of these things,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah,
And I guess the attitude in the Taoist world would be they're kind of natural and they can have their positives and negatives. I totally agree with you on the order, or sometimes I like the word structure or something like
structure.
that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Either one of those words work, though. I totally agree with you. And you can talk about the lung, in each of these phases or elements, you can have like two organs with them, and sometimes the order gets also tied into like the large intestine. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it's important to talk about these things. And then as far as emotional plague stuff, to my mind, that's how some of those things can go toxic. The order
Hmm.
and structure can be good, but then it can become like oppressive or
Yes.
excessive or
Yeah.
self-defeating
Yeah.
on some level, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then in line with this, the the sadness that is afflicts these organs can be, sadness over loss, usually.
Mhm.
And for me, the way that the mental image I use in my mind for the metal element is a filing cabinet, almost exclusively of which are metal, you know?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
And but then if you think about the loss of something from that, if you have an attachment to it, you will feel that the space where that one file once was. And so that grief, that sadness, that grief, that, difficulty in letting go is inhibitory to the positive function of that element. And that could be psychospiritually or psychologically inhibiting to your joy, your happiness. And there's a reason for that, which we can talk about now or kind of go into that later, but maybe we'll
I
do it
think
now.
that like even like on a personal level, like I was thinking about today, knowing we were going to do this, and I've had some losses that are sort of, personal losses of people I
Sure.
cared about, and you feel it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So even, if you want to go into your own experience and once you have this little snippet of information, you can realize, oh, you feel heavy in your chest, you feel heavy in your lungs, you feel like you need to sigh more, you feel like these kinds of feelings physically.
Mm,
You can almost feel it in your own body,
mm,
right?
mm.
Yeah. So I know you want to go into some of the more physiology behind it. I don't want to like, you want to do that now or,
Yeah, well, so well, let me do this one piece and then we can go into that, right? And so
we'll probably bounce around within this one, right? So
yeah,
yeah.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Hmm.
So Eric, you can tell me where this comes out of. I don't always have the exact text, but I forgot I took a continuing education class and they gave this sort of discussion on this and why the lung, why sadness and grief with the lung in particular. And we've talked about this before, but we'll do it again now because it's nice to give a little bit of background for people who are not Chinese medical practitioners. And even those who are, they can always use a little refresher. Um, so there's this idea of we call them bodies, or maybe we can I don't know what's another word for bodies, Eric, and like like the Hun and the Po and the Jur.
Oh, yeah, they're kind of interesting. They're kind of aspects of the psyche or the spirit, maybe, that
Yeah,
connect into the different organs.
yeah. So that's it.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, different.
It's
Yeah,
it's really deep. So again, we're getting a little Taoisty. We don't actually do as much Taoism in our podcast, ironically
no,
enough.
we
So we're getting
don't.
a little of this Taoist stuff here, but Chinese medicine sort of talks like the psyche of the person, right, is
Yeah,
affected not only by the brain but also by the heart
yeah,
in major ways.
yeah.
But then with the heart also kind of has these connections into the other major organs surrounding it, right?
Hmm.
And each of those can also affect the emotions and the psyche in their own ways, right? And then you get these
Hmm.
different names that are put on sort of different aspects of the psyche that are tied into these organs. So for the
Yeah.
lung, it's this thing called the Po. Yeah.
And the lung is the metal element is associated with kind of like the physical body. So the like we talked about the wood element that's sort of associated with like your dreaming body that at night where you go out and you travel at night in your dreams or whatever you do is associated with that. This one, however, is far more physical. They call it corporeal, right? In the classical kind of translations. And the reason for which the lung and large intestine are associated with sadness and grief, it's because of the loss that they are associated with in reference specifically to the physical body. So these other elements or archetypes, if you will, or pieces of our soul, if you want to call them that way, that are in the lung, I'm sorry, that are in the liver, that are in the heart, that are in the kidneys, or they will move on to the next life. They will move, they're far more ethereal, they're far more subtle. However, the lung and the large intestine are not subtle in reference to our bodies. They're not subtle at all. They're very physical. And they are also aware that they are not moving on to the next life. So any loss is very painful because it is a reminder for them that like they're not going to the next one. And so we tend to feel these things much more deeply than perhaps other aspects of our psyche that are shared by other organs. And so loss in general is very difficult for us because we are finite bodies and there is not another body for us to, to go to. Yet now maybe somebody will, have $1 trillion at some point and they can store their consciousness and put it into a dog and then then
Shoot that dog off to live on Mars.
right,
Who
you
could
never
we be
know.
talking of? Like,
I
who
don't
could we
know.
possibly be thinking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that it's difficult because it's a reminder of our mortality. And I tend to have, pretty open and honest discussions with patients about this thing in general, that like loss is a reminder of our mortality. Injury is a reminder of our mortality. Illness is a reminder of our mortality. And all of which bring up fear, all of which bring up a kind of a sadness. And this is difficult for us to deal with because there's not a whole lot of recourse, you know. So, we'll continue to talk about this as the episode unfolds, but I found that to be very helpful for me in terms of framing my mind as to why some of these things are so, so guttural to us, loss in particular, and how hard a grieving is a process that, it doesn't just happen, minute by minute. It takes time.
Yeah, there's a kind of a piece of this too, the way Taoists and then Chinese doctors influenced by Taoist ideas think is like it's ironic because I was just talking about this today in a class I was teaching.
Mm,
But the thing about the lung is it's very connected to like the external world in an immediate way. None of your
mm,
other organs are like immediately interacting with things. So what happens in the external world, if you want to think about it this way too, really has an impact on the lung, and then sort of the psychological aspects, you might talk about in the Taoist world affected by the lung. So those
mm-hmm,
events outside impact you much more immediately, right? And
mm,
so the losses are very immediately felt. And maybe these other parts can get a little bit more removed from that, but the lung is like right there in like the midst of it, right?
mm-hmm,
Because it's immediately connected. And like I think the Taoist thought process is very creative in this way. It looks at the organ and it says, okay, what's that organ's function? What is it doing? And then how does it impact the psyche of a person, right? And you
mm-hmm.
get some of their most creative stuff out of this, right? Things that you wouldn't think of for yourself. I had a patient, we were talking about this kind of stuff, like what you were saying, and he was like, well, I could sit on a rock for like 1,000 years. I wouldn't come up with this Chinese shit. And I was like, yeah, neither would I.
Right.
But when you see what they do, you're like, oh, that's creative way of thinking. And then it ends up being true. You could see cases like this, right? Look
But
through your own life and have losses, and you can see, oh, you could feel those in that way. Mhm.
Eric, that's a profound thing though, right?
Mhm.
That like your lungs, no, it makes sense in my mind that like they're into like fairness and justice and right order because they are engaging with they're literally taking in the outside world. So why would we want to take in chaos? Why would we want to take in disorganization into a highly organized system? Regardless of what people know or don't know about the body, it is a very well-tuned machine.
Mhm.
I mean, it takes quite a bit to ruin it, actually, for the most part. And so it makes sense to me, at least in my, crazy half Taoist, Chinese, Buddhist, whatever brain, that the interaction with the outside world we would want to have some semblance of order so that we can interact with it on a easier level than if it was more
Otherwise, it
chaotic.
feels unstable and you feel vulnerable, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
you want to know with the lung that everything's going to go orderly. You want to take the chance that you're not going to be able to breathe the next minute? No.
right.
No, you want that to be reliable and consistent, right?
Mm.
Yeah, it's interesting. And there's other
Absolutely.
metaphors for this too. Like we all have to breathe in the same atmosphere around us. There has to be sort of a shared thing. So I want stuff to feel fair. We all get our chance to breathe the same air, right?
Hmm.
No matter how rich you are, you still have to breathe. Well, I guess maybe no, you still have to breathe the same air some way or another.
Some way or another.
Yeah, even Peter Thiel has to breathe this air, or whoever you want to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, all right, cool. So, when I was kind of jotting down my ideas about this, and I imagine we're going to jump around with a lot of this, that I was thinking about the culture because we're talking about like what goes wrong in an individual level, and then where's the culture gone kind of funky. And there's different ways of talking about this, but I was just kind of thinking about all the elements of like sadness and grief that's happened, even in our lifetimes, right? Like we've had like multiple wars that have happened where there's been losses and, injuries to people. I mean, you lived through that in a very immediate way that we talked about
Mhm.
in episodes at times. And, I was talking with somebody in the last couple of weeks, just how many people came back injured, and you'd know somebody who had a partner who came back injured. It makes you sad talking about it. I can
Yeah.
feel it right now, right? Just so many people with that. And then we had economic losses, right? Financial crises and like people feeling super like losses within that and maybe still hasn't really totally healed, right?
Right.
On some level. I think those losses are still like there, And then we had a substance abuse crisis, right?
Bad.
We still have. You're right.
Yeah. I mean, it's
It's
just
getting
not,
it's getting better, but it's not, yeah.
yeah,
And
it's
it's
just
not
not.
covered as much.
No, they're
Yeah.
like, man, let's not talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah, we have substance abuse things. I mean, a lot of people who you feel sadness and grief with people who've had losses and damage to people. And then we have this like COVID thing, right? It's a lung infection itself. And if you go with the body and the mind being interconnected, everyone gets a bunch of lung infections. And then, that's going to be hard on, the physiology of this, all these lingering things that maybe have hung around, right?
Hmm.
Maybe we never really fully recovered from those things either, let alone like
Nope.
deaths and loss of loved ones. And, so anyways, it does make a certain sense. You were talking about, I can't remember which of these elements and phases we were talking about, but you said it well, this idea like, a country is like one big body kind of when you
Yeah.
think of it this way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then on a personal level, to me, I started thinking, well, you look around and, there's a lot of like interpersonal separations and divorces, and people feel the griefs of those, and those aren't easy to get over, right? It's a lot of
Yeah.
those
I
kinds
don't,
of personal losses. Yeah.
I think, I mean, I know divorce rate is like, in this country right now is like 50%, but
Yeah.
I just know so many people who are at this currently like
Yeah.
breaking up and getting, I mean, it's so many.
I mean, it's a coin flip anyways, but like sometimes you feel like even that seems like it's too low, right?
I think
Yeah.
50% is too low.
Yeah, it seems like it's more, right?
I mean,
And there's a
I think at this point it's the older, it's the Xers and the baby boomers who are far more married than not. And
yeah.
once the baby boomers go away, that number is going to go up. That number is going to go up for sure.
Let alone people just aren't doing it too.
But
So you
also
get to
correct.
like the Gen Zers and like some of the younger folks, and they're like, nah, I don't want to do this. And then you do get the thing like a lot of them are people who've seen like maybe parents divorce and things like that, and it's kind of left the imprints on them, right?
Hmm.
Kids of those things. Yeah, it's like obviously you start thinking about that, and we could all probably in our minds like list three, four, five, six people who we know are going through this some way or another,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And a lot of times there's kids involved, and it gets kind of ugly, especially get children involved. And that kind of drags, right? Like a lot of them that I know, people have kids and you're never quite done with that person and it never quite fully ends. It just keeps dragging and dragging, right? So you're constantly feeling that. And then,
Yeah.
you feel the sadness of seeing your kids go through it. Yeah,
Yeah.
very real. I mean, so if you start getting, we're being really real in an episode like this and all of them. That's
Yeah.
our jam. You start thinking, okay, well, that's a lot of like sadness and grief for people to be carting around,
Hmm.
right? Um, and then, kind of the explosion of like kids with a lot of issues too, right? How many
Yeah.
people are worried about their kids and sad about things affecting their children and stuff,
Hmm.
you know? Um, Comes up in episodes here and there, but Jonathan Haidt's really big on this social psychologist, and there's the rough ride the culture's been giving to kids, especially girls, over the last, 10, 15 years or
Oh
something, right?
yeah. Yeah.
That the social
We've been
media stuff
talking
got
about
really
this.
toxic. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been talking about this for at least 4 years.
Yeah.
Since we started, we've been talking about this.
It keeps popping up here and there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're a parent and you see your kids going through issues, oh, God damn, that you
Yeah.
really feel those things so deeply.
Hmm.
So I just thought about, on as far as the emotional plague thing and how stuff can like ripple through a culture in that way, I thought, okay, this is really powerful stuff that people will have to deal with around this particular set of issues, the long sadness and grief and these questions, right? And then the idea that that's a physiological thing and like psychological emotional thing. And I guess if you really think about it, and I didn't put it in the notes, but like the air quality is kind of shit in a lot of places too, you
Totally.
know? So, it's like if you look at like what would damage this thing and like make this whole set of emotions and psychological problems more intense, even our air quality is not that great, right?
Yeah, a reminder for the audience, right? The body can affect the mind as equal as the mind can affect the body. So, Eric is pointing out what we call environmental factors, right? Things that will affect your soma, things that will affect your body. That yes, okay, they're affecting your body, right? Air quality is poor. There are a lot of particulates that are just sort of floating around in people's homes. People are not going outside enough. They're just, our body's having to filter a lot of these things with sort of depressed lung function, which then depresses the emotional function of the lung in our minds as well. So we're more prone to sadness and grief. And I want to make this point before we move on for, those people who listened. If not, you could totally check it out. But on the episode that we did on anger, and it was my contention at that time that like sadness and grief, fear, grief, sadness will move you into a state of fight or flight
Mhm.
because people don't want to linger in the sad state. Like I mentioned it then, and I think it's some psychological I don't know, tendency, a discussion that like anger is kind of like a secondary emotion, that you're usually angry about something, but underneath, once that energy of that anger dissipates, what remains is usually some kind of sadness or grief or fear or some more vulnerable emotional state. And so in this state of grief or in this state of sadness, people will mask it with fear. I'm sorry, they'll mask it with anger.
Mhm.
And that encompasses a lot of people. So you might be angry because you're breathing in mold or something like this. Just it can happen.
Yeah, it's kind of like can be a vicious circle then because, the physiology, the lungs aren't working well, and you also have emotional events in your life that are sadness and grief inducing, and then you get this two-way street,
Hmm.
and then you like lose your chicken and the egg of the whole thing, right? It's just going
Hmm.
around in a circle. You can get to these things are fun to explore when you're having these kinds of conversations, and hopefully if you're listening to them. So there's like yin and yang of the emotions too. And you could think that the more yin emotions feel more fragile, like in yin yang theory, right? So if you get into sadness and grief or fear and fright, those are the kind of the more yin emotions. Probably turn you more in, right?
Hmm.
They're more like inward moving or something, and they also feel you probably feel more fragile in them, right? Where when you have like anger, it's a very like yang
Outward, yeah.
outward, and it just feels you'd rather be in that state.
Absolutely.
That'll feel better, and then it ends up being a thing that can mask these other emotions.
Hmm.
Child's medical theory, the fear can go and like feed into anger in a very direct way, like what you were bringing up in the episode when we were talking about that, right?
Yeah.
Fear directly feeding in, and then sadness and grief, you know, in a way, these emotions of like fairness and equality and justice and these things are supposed to control some of that anger.
Yeah.
But that's really weak. It can't,
Yeah.
and the anger will kind of erupt out, right? Of the inability for those like sort of more positive aspects of the emotions with the lung and the metal and so on to be able to control those angry ones. But that's really weak. You can't control the anger. And
No.
it's a theory. I mean, you could say, why did the culture get so angry? We got multiple reasons why. We're exploring different
Yeah.
angles on them, but this is like part of a picture then, if you want to look at it from a Taoist Chinese medical point of view, for sure.
Well, I mean, in part, why do we get so angry is because people are always teaching other people that things aren't fair.
That's an interesting thing. Flesh that out a little bit more. Let me see. What do you think about that?
So we can agree that the system is not equal. Okay? System is not equal. And this goes back far, right? Think of we okay, Native Americans, Thanksgiving is coming or will have just happened by the time this episode comes out or whatever, right? So the system isn't fair. It wasn't fair to them. They got blankets with smallpox and they were all kinds of pathogens and and then they were murdered and whatever, given a raw deal. And then slavery, obviously, raw deal. And I know it happened all around the world, but I'm just talking about here, you know. And then you had your Jim Crow laws. You had, women were not able to vote. They were not, like there was these tiers of citizens in this country. This is not like, woke, somebody woke, whatever. This is real life. This is how it was, right? It wasn't that, we've mentioned this numerous times in the podcast. It wasn't that long ago that women couldn't get a checking account without a letter from their husband or their father.
My mom couldn't get a credit card until like the early 1970s. She was born in 1940.
Okay, so she's
I
in
mean,
her 30s.
you couldn't live independently, right?
No, couldn't
How
do
could
it.
you do it? Yeah.
You couldn't
Hmm.
do it. So there is always injustice in this system. There's probably injustice in every system because usually it's the people with the most power that are making the rules. So, okay, fine. So we can all agree that there is injustice in every system. I know I made all the arguments and I'm agreeing with myself. I'm understanding that this is how it goes, but this is our show. So, whatever. Logically, you could, whatever. However, it is that is withstanding of my argument. My argument then is that there are people who essentially are feeding other people further injustices, right? True or untrue, they evoke the same response because you believe them to be real. And then when you isolate yourself into an in group, which is inherently not part of the out group, and the in group that you are now self identified with, and I say self identified, meaning that you identify the group that you are in, i.e., the in group, as yourself. Okay. And this could be anything from your culture, like your specific ethnic culture. This could be your identified culture of trucker or plumber or whatever, priest. This could be your culture of liberal minded people, MAGA minded people, whatever. Your group, you feel this the same as you. And then you will find, then you add the algorithm into that equation that then targets your group, and then you will find people, or maybe more, they will find you, that are telling you specifically your in group is being picked on. These are the injustices that your in group is being subject to. And here are the people who are subjecting you to these injustices. And then therefore your, justice center in your specifically your metal element is activated. And it takes us all the way back to the beginning of our discussion about 3 minutes ago. Anger arises now because you are sensing an injustice and you are going to fight tooth and nail against those whom you think are delivering said injustice to you and your group. Therefore,
Well,
people
there's
be angry.
kind of like a propagandizing element to this, right?
Yes.
So you could fall into these like, however this played out. I mean, there's always been propaganda too. It's not like there's never been a time
Correct.
probably you don't have human propaganda, but there's like powerful propagandizing things going on. And then you get to the other part of this, which you allude to as well, but like the economic injustices of the system.
Yeah.
Because now you got people who are like hoarding tons and tons of money and power in
Hmm.
these really kind of insane ways. And other people like, we're trying to like people are trying to live on like scraps that maybe trickle down or something, right? Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, there's a whole theory around that. Just total bullshit. I always think of like Robert Thurman, who came on the podcast years ago, right? We got to reach out to him again at some point, Bobby
Yeah,
T.
man.
And we were just talking about trickle down economics and that, which is total bullshit. And he was commenting on that. I remember that in our intro. Anyways, uh,
Does that make sense though, Eric? Do you understand what I'm saying? You feel me? Like,
yeah, yeah, for sure. It's like in a certain sense, it's a little bit of a manipulation of the metal or something like a
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
manipulation of the virtues of it.
mm-hmm,
You sort of like because they're not. I think for it to be truly fair, you have to be able to step back and have a kind of an equanimity, you might say, about
mm-hmm.
things. Let me take a step back and really, you think about the scales or something. Let me really take a step back and see if this thing seems fair or not. But you can rile people up around this, right?
Last,
Yeah, and kind of use it against, other people. Hmm.
last sentence of the Pledge of Allegiance. Do you remember it, Eric?
I was just thinking about it the other day, with liberty and justice for all.
There you go. Shout
Yeah,
out to the metal element right there.
yeah,
That's what's
yeah.
cool about, I mean, there's many things that are cool, but that's what's cool about this kind of like Taoist view of the psychophysical view of the body and of the mind, is that these things are all present in what it is that we are being taught and engaging with. So I hope that people find this interesting because, we always have, you know.
It's like kind of like this idea that there's an intrinsic potential to show these positive qualities kind of like
Yes.
latently there, right? It's like kind of you could say the system is finely balanced, like you said earlier. These things are kind of like latently within that system, right? You could, if you want to frame it that way, there's a certain wisdom within it that can get tapped into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole Constitution and the Bill of Rights is a metal act.
Putting order and structure on
Yeah.
something to try to create liberty and justice for in a flawed way. We have to acknowledge the
Of
history,
course.
deeply flawed. But underneath it, you could see there's a virtue that's trying to squeeze its way out through all the
Yeah.
prejudices and
Yeah.
other things are, don't want to be minimizing of any of the, the atrocious elements of things, but underneath you
Correct.
can tell there's something of wisdom that wants to try to force its way through, and it still
Yeah.
keeps on struggling to try to get out.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I was thinking about like that fairness, justice, equality thing. If you really have problems in the metal element, then you can get propagandized. Or one of the things that obviously goes wrong if you lose the sense of those virtuous qualities, then you can have the idea that you want to like seize power.
Mm.
And that whole thing of wanting to seize power is, toxic and obviously works against this sense of like equality. The whole thing of wanting to seize power intrinsically has within it this idea that I deserve to have power and you don't, right?
Yeah.
So this idea that I'm going to like seize the power away from you because I deserve it and you all don't. And that's obviously a toxicity within this, it works directly against the virtue of what this is supposed to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, you could see this in like multiple ways within the culture. Obviously, the culture has real problems with racism, has real problems with like aspects of anti-Semitism, access to presidents, prejudice against all kinds of people, who look differently on the outside, you know. So it has those deep problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even like, like living in Chicago, there were these sort of ICE events that were happening. It's kind of toned down a little bit. I think order and structure got a little bit reimposed, right, to hold back some of those displays of power. But you could feel the unfairness of that, if you know
Mm-hmm.
people who are Spanish speaking people that are within your circle and within your friend group, a lot of students for me too, right?
Mm-hmm.
People I know personally, patients and students and personal friends where you're like, okay, this is all, I mean, it makes you want to cry thinking about it. You can really feel the metal of it, right? The
Yeah.
injustice and the unfairness of it.
Yeah.
One of the expressions of that is that, you feel that injustice and fairness and it like brings you to tears somehow, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could feel
Mm-hmm.
that connection like so strong. Yeah. So I would, argue that, in terms of our emotional plague thing, you can see the elements of where this is sort of like off the rails in some ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, on the order, structure, and propriety thing, right? That was the other part. Maybe we can talk about a little bit before we have to like wrap this one up. But I think we've done a good job with it, you
I
know?
think so. Yeah. Maybe we end
Yeah.
on a little bit of a positive note because this is.
Not we're all in tears at the end of the episode. Yeah, I'm like this, like um that can go good or bad, right? Like we were talking
Yeah.
about earlier,
Yeah.
and it's funny, framing it from a Taoist point of view, when it goes bad, then you get this thing where you try to put too much structure on the thing that you want to allow to flow naturally, right? And if you like kill the natural flow and movement of a thing by over-structuring, over-ordering it, you kind of kill the life within it or something like that. And that's sort of a problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a little bit about this. I want to do an episode at some point, maybe on Christian nationalism, because I think there's going to have to be something where Christianity is going to have to straighten itself out in the United States. We have positive versions of it and parts that are very authoritarian. I think that's an important subject, right?
Yeah.
Of how this thing is going to straighten itself out. Obviously, there's really good Christian people, and it's good Christian people are
Totally.
out there trying to
Yeah.
like do their good Christian deeds. And there's one of the people that I like, a Dr. Yves Requena. He's a French MD and acupuncturist, Chinese medical theorist, and he talks about the metal element with Christianity.
Mm.
And when you look at that, there's multiple ways you could see that, both in the potential, the way it could go for good, or if it has problematic aspects, because in Christianity, and what can be very moving about it on the positive side of it, is you can get these things like, as we talked about in different episodes now, when this has come up, like Sermon on the Mount, fairness to everyone, the meek shall inherit the earth, and blessed are all the people who aren't getting justice now, because they will get justice and will establish a kind of a fairness for people. And that's the virtue of that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
Christianity can be very powerful with that,
Mm-hmm.
that part of the Christian message, which is everyone should be treated equally and everyone should be treated fairly and everyone should be respected as an individual spiritual being that deserves equal respect. It's beautiful, right? So the beautiful aspects of Christianity are there, right?
Mm-hmm.
In those metallic qualities, because it does talk about like justice, don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
In
Yeah.
very powerful ways, very
Yeah.
moving ways. You and I were both at least partially raised within Christian households, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
Christianity floating around in our backgrounds, and that part's still moving to me. Even though maybe I'm not a Christian now in the same way, I feel that very deeply,
Yeah.
right? It's very beautiful, right? And also those elements of like, I'm willing to sacrifice a little bit to try to achieve those goals, right? That's a virtuous act, to do that. It's beautiful, right? And then on the other hand, though, you can get the things where you can get the parts that are like, I have an idea of how things are supposed to be, and my order and structure I have to impose on you. That's a problem. And obviously, any Orthodox system can go that way, right?
Mm.
Not just Christianity, but like I think in him pointing that out, that can happen. That idea that I'm going to impose the way I think things should be, my order and structure on other folks. No bueno, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
downside of the mellow element being there, and some of these things can be kind of puritanical, right?
Yeah.
And you can get within that idea of wanting to impose a certain structure on others, you can get judgmentalness.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to a lot to people in these, we did the stuff on cults in the beginning of the whole thing, and I made kind of a point for the benefit of our podcast to listen to people who kind of broke out of some of these Christian nationalist spaces. And I love those that are really stayed Christian too, because you can see they're really wrestling with these questions within their own spirituality and faith. I deeply respect that, right? Like bring it up in different episodes as we talked about this. But they're like, yeah, we were really judgmental people. And now we look back on that and we're like, we regret that.
Mm.
There was a judgmentalness that was sort of within this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where structure and order and all that, and the desire to impose that upon others becomes kind of toxic,
Right.
right? And that's how we thought about things. So we thought, here's how you're supposed to act in all these ways, and if you don't act like us, we're kind of against you, And beyond that, we deserve to like impose our thing on you, right? And I think that's what is straightening itself out in the United States some way or another. We have a branch of like our spirituality, our religion within our culture that has that thing in it,
Yeah.
you know? Or on a more personal level, just to throw it out. I don't know what you think about this, and we're wrapping this up, but this transcending of like shame and guilt is part of this too, right?
Yeah.
Because there can be the color associated with the metal element and these things we've been talking about is white, and that has to do with like purification of something, right? It's kind of the imagery
Mm-hmm.
around this. You can take that for what it's worth. But even when you were talking about the Po earlier, corporeal, but if you look at the Chinese, it's white, the white spirit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so some of that could be good. You can do spiritual practice and kind of purify yourself out, and that's not all bad. But then you can also get within this if the order and the structure and the rules get too heavy and too imposing, that can happen in, you know, religiosity, Christian and
Yep.
otherwise, then it's
Yep.
stifling. And you can walk around feeling a lot of shame and guilt, if the metal isn't healthy,
The
right?
further conservative you go in any structure, in any system, the more structure there is.
Yeah. And I'm really getting comfortable with that idea. Someone threw out in the words of like, it's not Christianity or Islam or any other religion, Hinduism or any of these, big religions you want to talk about that are the core of the problem. It's the more you go Orthodox, the more
Yeah.
problems you're going to have within it.
Correct.
Because it's going to get more and more what you were talking about earlier, rigid
Yes.
and more self-justifying and rationalizing of like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, now I deserve to impose this upon others. So now I'm going to do that, and I'm then warranted to do it by force, you
Mm.
know, and that's seems fair to me,
Right. Yeah. To me, because
From
I'm the
my
one doing it.
perspective, that looks just.
Yeah. Seems good.
If like you're not going to bring yourself to justice, I'll do it for you.
Hmm.
I'll purify you, even against your own will. I'll make it pure. Or if you've been like, I was raised Catholic, and some of this you internalize too, and
Mm.
this idea you carry these shame and guilts about things,
Original sin.
original sin, yeah, and bad feelings about your desires and we were talking a little bit off mic before we started, but part of Project 2025, which I started it out, I made it sound like the old Tweety Bird cartoon, 2025.
Yeah.
When we were talking earlier.
Or as
20,
now we're calling it 2020 twat.
yes, terrible project. But they're going to eliminate pornography, and there's a whole scheme behind it. A lot of cleverness going into this. So they're going to like try to use economic means. And pornography is flawed. None of us are like saying pornography is the most awesome thing, but it taps into this idea of like guilt around like very
Yes.
basic, vital elements of human life and experience, right?
Hmm.
And you can walk around with shame and guilt. So that has to be transcended. That's a personal thing and a cultural thing too,
Yeah.
right? You got a culture that walks around with a lot of shame and guilt, and the people carry this individually. There's no good Taoism that comes out of that, right?
No. Well, I mean, this country was founded by puritanicals,
Yeah.
right? The Puritans. That's what they came here for. They wanted a more conservative, a more orthodoxy view of their religion because they didn't have it enough. There wasn't enough where they were from. They said, "Fuck that. We don't want nobody to tell us."
How much, yeah, how much we want to impose
Yeah, no. We want to
restrictions on
impose
ourselves.
we want to impose more rules. There's not enough rules here. We need more rules. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, which is just such a wild, but I still think that that threat is still pervasive in society today. And and I've mentioned this in the previous episode, but I'm going to say it again. If I tell somebody, don't think about the pink elephant, what's the first thing you think about? The pink elephant. So when you tell somebody don't follow these rules, the first question someone asks is, well, why not? That there's rules for a reason. Well, it could be fun. I don't know. Maybe you don't like it. Maybe I will. But I think curious folks, which more people I think are curious now than. I mean, maybe they've always been this way, but there's less punishment for being curious now than say 200 years ago or 100 years ago. People don't like the rules and restrictions. And so rules and restriction being in the center. On one side, people want the ability to explore and be free and create. And on the other one, they think that, I mean, I'm generalizing greatly, I realize. But on the other side, they'll say that, well, if there are no rules and there are no structure, again, these are very diametrically opposing views, but if there are no rules, there are no structures, well, then we're going to just divulge into chaos. And humans essentially are, chaotic creatures and have the capability for great evil and to ruin their lives and so on and so forth. Now, yeah, people have tendencies, of course, right? But I am just not of the belief that humans are bad. I am of the belief that humans, left to their own devices, will actually cooperate and will find common ground, will create a relatively cohesive culture that will deal with all the various things that they will have to deal with. I mean, we survived for a long time without much, under far worse conditions, and we're able to do that without completely killing off the entire species. It would stand to reason to me that we are far more cooperative creatures than not. And, I have people in my life who, believe different politically than I do. They're not opting for murder because someone doesn't hold the same view that they do. You know what I mean? Most people are good. Most people are good people. They may
I think
root for a different team. It's just, but they're still good at the center. You take away a few beliefs, and they're good people. So I just don't believe that like the desire for more rules and regulations keeps us in a safer place. I'm just not under that belief.
well, I
Maybe
mean, like
that's naive.
orthodoxy will always, go beyond the proper balance of these things, right? If you want to be Taoist about it, when you push something to its extreme, it tends to like fail, right? Or go to its opposite. You lose the
Yeah.
balance of it, right?
Yeah.
So you need a certain amount of something, we were talking a little bit about music. I'm playing a little bit more guitar. Music has a lot of structure and order, and it can be
Totally.
beautiful, right? But if you you need to have the beauty of the structure and the proper context. But yeah,
Mm.
I'm convinced of it's a simple thing to say, and it's kind of obvious on some level. You push something too much too far,
Yeah,
it's going to go ugly,
correct.
right? You lose your balance of it. And again, I like the idea, at a certain point for our podcast, what's happening? Well, we're in a way trying to present an alternative spirituality to things that are too orthodox. That is an undercurrent of what we
Mm-hmm.
do.
Mm-hmm.
Because, when you get to the spiritualities that are not that way, they're about freedom
Yeah.
and liberty and justice for all.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The other thing I can add before we check out, because I know we're gonna get out here in a second, this
Yeah.
whole idea of human beings being good at the core, it's a Buddhist idea, it's a Taoist idea, right? It's not an original sin idea. But just to wrap it up, it's a Wilhelm Reich idea too.
Yeah.
The psychologist, who started this whole thing with the emotional play, because and we talked about this in different episodes, but always nice to remind, if you scrape away the emotional plague, what do you find underneath? And his
Mm-hmm.
argument is you find living things that want to love and share and be creative, right? And yeah, creativity, uh, uh, love, and the ability to share like joyful and pleasant experience. You got three
Mm-hmm.
qualities. You scrape it away, that's what you're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
So he has that same idea of the positive, right? Scrape away the toxic, and you're going to find the good core.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I realize, even as I'm talking that like some rules and guidance is required to make the playing field more even for those who were inherently underserved when the original rules were made. So I'm not, a proponent of just removing all things, right, and just letting
Or
society roll.
even
But
when we were talking about because this is what you've been the guy and I've been in some ways like discussing the metal element at different times over all of 2025, right?
yeah,
And part of the idea of like the Confucian thing was like we got to get some rules and structure going on so we don't have people who will abuse their power over others.
correct,
So we
correct.
better put something in here that will create liberty and justice for all,
Yeah.
So we got to try to do that. And then that's the beauty of the metal element. Now you're talking about the virtue of the metal element, and you're not talking about the toxicities of it, right?
Hmm.
It's good framing. All right, that
Yeah.
feels
Yeah.
like a good spot to end. We did
I
it.
yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Pretty good exploration of metal for everybody.
Yeah. So I know a little bit, a little down, a little, a little sadness, a little grief, a little metal, but that's what it is.
But there's a beauty within it, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we
I
found
mean,
like, you want to create justice and order to make things fair, and then, there can be a beauty in the order and the structure and all that.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as
We
always,
weren't we weren't totally dour about it.
no, not totally, but it is a
Oh, you felt it was I felt it was like we got to the sweet spot at the end.
okay.
Okay.
Well, audience, you
Yeah.
you can for those 5% who is remaining, you can let us know if this was a downer or a illuminator or a, a we did it justice.
Yeah. Justice and fairness and equality. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's right. That's right. Eric, thank you so much for
Thanks, Daniel.
doing it. Audience, like, comment, subscribe, leave something. I don't know. Do whatever you do. Email us, ginandtantra@gmail.com. Hit us up on the gram, the Gin and Tantra podcast. Give us your thoughts. Give us your, nothing inappropriate. For Eric, this is Daniel.